Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we're going to be doing something quite different. We're going to talk with an author, but this is a very different author and a very different kind of book. It's called Painkillers. It's a novel. The author is Jerry Stahl. The publisher is William Morrow, an imprint of HarperCollins, and I'd like to thank you for coming by.
It's really a pleasure. Thank you.
It isn't often that in red ink yet.
Red ink.
Red ink. The publisher says this about the author they've sent me. From the brilliantly demented author of Permanent Midnight and I, Fatty, comes a novel of American Nazis, born-again porn, secret pharmaceuticals, felonious love, and one very disturbing German.
Well, as you can tell, it started off as an after-school special. And we decided to make it a novel.
Brilliantly demented is in quotes. Do you know who said that about you? I mean,
I'll hunt them down as soon as I can.
Yeah,
but,
I think you should sue.
Yes, I
actually.
would. Yeah.
Yeah, because, I don't know, you don't look demented to me.
Well, maybe demented, but not brilliantly demented.
That's right. Yeah,
when you start bragging, it gets...
You have a lower level.
Yeah, it gets sad.
Yes. Yeah. And then this fellow James Elroy, whom we've had on the show several times, says that, where is what he said?
Good question.
I had it right here. And now...
He's an elusive man.
Oh, here it is. Jerry Stahl is the American hipster bard. Poetry? Have you written poetry for the hippies, for the hipsters?
There's no accounting for taste. I'm not sure what bard means exactly, but...
There's no accounting for Elroy either.
There's no accounting for Elroy's blurbs, clearly, but I'm grateful to have it.
One of the things that I would guess there are some common things between you and James, but the thing that I think you have that he doesn't have in his writing, not to say in person, but in his writing, he doesn't have the ongoing sense of humor that you put, at least into this book.
That does not seem to be his goal.
Yeah.
I've always been afflicted with that no matter what I'm writing about. The more serious the subject and inappropriate the humor, the more humor there's going to be.
Well, that's good. I like that. I like that a lot. The book is different in many ways. First of all, one could say that for the most part, it's set in San Quentin.
A large part of it is, yes.
I mean, and while you go on about the outward beauty of it and the fact that everybody wants to buy it and put condos there, it ain't a very pleasant place.
No, part of the reason I wanted to set it there is because I wanted to write about Americans' ongoing fetish with prison and the prison porn network, otherwise known as MSNBC, which when they're not running Oberman and Mad Al,
oh God! That
on
program.
the weekends,
yeah.
it's nonstop lockup, and that fascinates me. That is now entertainment.
Ugh.
It's a long way from Lawrence Welk.
The book also asks a question that is rather different. What if Josef Mengele is still alive?
Yes,
it's an interesting question.
It's an interesting question because. It gave me a way in to explore some of the questions about him, which is essentially what I didn't know and I wanted to put into the book was that many of the more heinous, quote-unquote, medical experiments he performed in the death camps at Auschwitz were financed by the Rockefeller Foundation and other American entities devoted to the premise that Aryans are the superior race and that eugenics is a legitimate science.
You know, there's a book that must be 10, 15 years old now that I remember reading, which made that very point, or the point that the book made was that during World War II, many of our, Fortune 500 companies continued to make vast sums of money trading with the Germans, especially.
Yeah.
And they didn't really care whether whatever they made of a warlike nature was used by our side or their side.
Well, case in point being our last illustrious president's grandfather, Prescott Bush, did a lot of business over there. And there's another great book called IBM and the Holocaust by Edwin Black, which really lays out exactly how computers were developed originally to keep track of inmates in the concentration camps.
Oh, my God.
And this is true. This is speculative. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to use Mengele as a way in to explore that world without doing so in sort of a didactic nonfiction way.
Yeah, it could have become a research paper in a way, if you did, and it's not going to be a research paper because of the lead character, who's one of the most down and out ex-cops I've ever heard of, and still having trouble with drugs. Right.
Well, no knock on nonfiction, didactic.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. I hear everything you're not saying. I use that kind of character because I get a lot of my history. I love reading history in novels, but I'm not going to read a history book because I'm just not wired that way for the most part.
Well, we're wired today to learn more about painkillers, and you'll get it if you stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Painkillers, that's today's book. The author is Jerry Stahl. Published, the book is by William Morrow, an imprint of HarperCollins. Publishers Weekly had some interesting things to say about the book. Stahl, they write, is no stranger to smashing social taboos.
I think they'd leave my personal life out of this, but I guess not.
And his trademark blend of ballsy, blacker than black humor, and wry social commentary lets him find humor in the Third Reich. That's what it says. Well, I think we talked a little bit about in the first segment, you kind of, can't resist, the humor. And in an interview someplace else, I think you say something like, one has to know suffering in order to be able to do humor, or something like that.
That was actually an Ernest Hemingway quote, who said that a man has to suffer quite a bit in his life to write a funny book.
Uh-huh.
And in regards to that, if you read anything about Hitler, one of the things I found most fascinating, that he was never afraid of assassination, but his biggest fear was being laughed at.
Huh.
So for me, being able to explore this in a way that makes light, in a way that doesn't denigrate the seriousness of what happened, but the individuals involved, to me, were ludicrous as men.
And there are many scenes, if you will, in this book that I found simply laughing out loud funny.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that Manny Rupert, drug addict and ex-cop, goes undercover at San Quentin as an instructor in a drug rehab program.
Yes. I thought, what would be the most uncomfortable and original way to get him in there? And I can't think of anything more demented, to use your favorite word, than that, because it is true. You can't con a con. And when he's in there trying to fool these guys, it's over.
Yeah. He starts to recite AA, I shouldn't say slogans, but AA dictums.
Which he learned while he was sober. And now that he's slipped and found himself in the most dangerous place on the planet, trying to fake being clean, it's a little rough.
The dirty secret about that, of course, is that he ain't clean that day.
That day. He was the day before, but that day didn't work out.
One day at a time.
That's right.
One day at a time.
But for him, it's every other day at a time.
And then he turns in somebody else's urine because he's taken drugs that morning.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that because of that urine, they are looking upon him as a transgender person.
Right. It happens. He's basically turned in a woman's urine by accident, and a person was a man and is taking the hormones to become a woman. So he's sort of on the fence, and now they view him in a whole other light.
Oh, don't they?
Yes, they do. He makes a lot of new friends.
The other thing that that got to me was he's in San Quentin. There, in terms of trying to find out whether the old guy, the 97-year-old fellow who's in his drug class, is actually Mengele or some kind of phony, he has to go to L.A.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a problem getting to L.A., so he flags down a Mercedes-Benz. And in the Mercedes-Benz is a chazit.
Yes, a Hasidic Jew, yes.
Yes, and what happens from there?
He steals the man's clothes so he can escape. So he has the odd experience.
Not just the clothes, but the
schmidok, as they say, not to get obscene on the air, which is the fur hat. So he wears the full-on Hasidic garb and thus realizes what it's like to be stared at and hated because nobody wants to sit next to him on the plane, except for one woman who finds it weirdly sexy.
Yes. Well, you never know.
One doesn't know. Thank God. Yeah.
You just don't know. I mean, really.
It sounds like you've had some experiences like that yourself.
A lot of people look at me as odd. Yeah. And, I have problems finding a friend on a plane. Yeah.
Yet that one woman who wants to sit next to you desperately probably just won't let you be.
True.
I could tell.
That part doesn't happen often enough. The overall arc of this story is it covers things like strange, violent things in state prison, neo-Nazis, human experiments, and my favorite, Christian call girls. And weirdest of all, they say, true love that binds Tina. Tina, yes.
Right, his ex-wife and he, who are linked because I sort of have always had this theory that damage loves damage and that, anybody who's been to hell sort of doesn't trust anybody else who hasn't been there.
Hasn't been there. Painkillers is so hard-edged and fast-paced. You don't think of research when you're reading it, but just stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at JimFosterCoc or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast. I'm Jim Foster. Our guest today is the wonderful Jerry Stahl, talking to us about a very different and wonderful kind of book. It is called Painkillers, published by William Morrow, a division of Harper and Row. And a gentleman by the name of Tom Franklin said something that, for me, needs a little explanation. From the opening gut punch, this book had me laughing and turning pages. Jerry Stahl is Thomas Berger's wicked stepson, and his new novel is a tour de force. Now, is that a compliment, being a stepson of Thomas Berger?
Never having met the late Mr. Berger, I can't say, but I'm going to take it as a compliment.
Yeah, I think you should. I mean, what's the alternative?
Self-loathing, and that never gets you anywhere.
It's terrible stuff. Let's talk a little bit more about Tina and Manny. Now, Tina has a kind of different background.
It's a checkered past. It's not what they call in Hollywood a cute meet. He when he was a cop.
Cute meet?
Cute meet, as they say in Hollywood.
Oh, I like that.
That's MEET, by the way.
Okay.
And he met her when he was a policeman, and he went to investigate a murder and found her husband slumped over a bowl of Drano-laced Lucky Charms when she had just murdered him. He fell instantly in love and threw the evidence in the, down the incinerator, and they've been together ever since until they were divorced.
There's.
I know what you're thinking. That old routine.
Well,
yeah.
There's no doubt that that's the beginning of enduring love.
Of one kind, yes.
Yes. Now, that's not the only love in the book.
No, it isn't. But there is a certain kind of love when your wife has murdered her first husband that keeps you on your toes.
Yes, it does. There is a Sergeant Darnell, a winsome lass, who is the guardian of the visiting area at Quentin. And our friend Rupert has to get in there, and she's been giving him a hard time. He has been escorted from the time he arrived at San Quentin by an officer named Colfax, and this involves Colfax and Sergeant Darnell. When Sergeant Donnell shifted her gaze from me to Colfax, her plump face softened into discreet affection. Unconsciously or not, she put her thumb over her wedding ring just because their office happened to include killers, random violence, incarceration, and lockdowns. That didn't mean an office romance couldn't bloom. Colfax did everything but float a foot off the floor and bat his eyelashes at his ample amour. I wondered if his ardor was rewarded or more in the realm of chivalric poetry, where the whole point was devotion and unfulfilled desire, as opposed to consummation in a stolen hour of conjugal bunk time. All I know for certain is that if we kept standing there, little red cartoon hearts would probably start fluttering from the burly guard's chest, and the line of tired, excited, understandably upset prison visitors behind us might get violent. Now that's love on a sunny afternoon at San Quentin.
It's pretty much puppies and buttercups for me, as you can tell in much of this book.
That actually, the interesting thing about that is that's it as far as that romance is concerned.
Well, perhaps there'll be a sequel.
I mean, I was hoping for consummation myself.
Well, who isn't?
Yeah. But nothing happens.
Sorry to let you down, but,
yeah.
Wait for the next volume.
In an interview in Publishers Weekly, you gave a very interesting answer to the question, were you concerned about having a universally reviled war criminal as a main character? And this is the way you answered. What's most terrifying about a character like Mengele is that at the end of the proverbial day, we all belong to the same species. It would be easier if he were a monster, but he was a man, which is what makes him both more horrifying and more grimly fascinating. That's interesting.
To me, I think it's always a cop-out to look at people of the sort of Mengele or Stalin or Hitler and judge them as some freak of nature. What is, I think, really terrifying, particularly for a man like Mengele, who didn't grab power. He was appointed by a system that was in place that rewarded his behavior. And I wrote this in the depths of the Bush administration when I was trying to sort of come to grips with the fact of all the things that were being done in our name to non-whites the world over. And I sensed a parallel.
Yeah. Horrifying to sense that parallel, I think.
But inescapable.
Yeah. The other thing in the same article, you talk about research.
Mm-hmm.
And, in a way, this kind of book is a kick, and it's a lot of fun to read. But behind it, you say if you were to pass on, they come to get to your house and clean it out, they would find mountains of articles, books, DVDs, and videos about human experiments, Josef Mengele, the Third Reich, Nazi sex fetishes, bulimia, and on and on and on. So you did work.
Well, everybody has a hobby. So, yes, I marinated myself in this material, and had I keeled over, that would have been it.
You would have had it.
Mm-hmm.
Painkillers is the title. Jerry Stahl is the author. It's a book you shouldn't miss because it's very different, very exciting, very fast reading, and in a sense it has a very deep message to convey. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.